The chains were silver. That was the first cruelty. The second was that they burned. Serenai had stopped screaming 3 hours ago. Now she only shook, wrists raw and blistered where the metal kissed her skin, her breath coming in shallow gasps that tasted like copper and ash. The cells smelled like old blood and something darker, fear, maybe, or the ghost of every broken thing that had ever been dragged down here to rot. She pressed her back against the cold stone wall and tried to remember how to breathe without sobbing. Above her, the citadel was celebrating. She could hear it, the distant roar of voices, the stamp of boots, the howls of wolves drunk on relief and triumph. They were celebrating him. King Valor Draven. The Alpha who had risen from his deathbed like something out of legend, veins clean, body whole, strength flooding back into limbs that had been withering for weeks. They were celebrating life. And they had chained the girl who gave it to him. Serenai tilted her head back, eyes closed, and let the truth settle into her bones the way it always did, heavy, familiar, inevitable. Of course they chained her. Of course they feared her. She had touched a dying king and pulled him back from the edge of the void, and instead of gratitude, they saw witchcraft. Instead of a miracle, they saw a curse finally revealing its teeth. The healer who'd stumbled. The bowl that shattered. Her palm slamming against his bare chest. She hadn't meant to touch him. She never meant to touch anyone. But the moment her skin met his, the world had split open. Pain like wildfire. Ice and flame tearing through her veins. Something ancient and sleeping inside her had woken with a furious, dragging pull, a luminous force ripping from her core into his failing heart. The silver veins beneath his skin had retreated. Faded. Dissolved. He had inhaled, full, powerful, alive. And she had collapsed. When she woke, she was here. Underground. Alone. Burning. The guards had whispered as they dragged her down the stone steps, their hands rough, their eyes wide with something between awe and terror. They hadn't looked at her face. No one ever looked at her face. But she had felt their fear like a living thing, crawling over her skin, wrapping around her throat. Serenai opened her eyes and stared at the iron bars. 22 winters she had lived in Wolf's Reach, and not once had anyone touched her without flinching. Not once had anyone spoken her name without a curse trailing behind it. She had been found as a newborn at the border, wrapped in torn crimson cloth beneath a waning blood moon. No markings. No scent. No family. Just a strange, unnatural stillness around her, like the earth itself was holding its breath. The elders had taken one look at her eyes and whispered the word that would follow her for the rest of her life. Cursed. She didn't remember learning to walk, but she remembered learning to disappear. To make herself small. To move through the world like a shadow no one wanted to see. She slept in a shed behind the stables. She cleaned blood from stone floors. She hauled waste, buried stillborn animals, scrubbed sickness from places others refused to step. Children were dragged away if they wandered too close. Food was slid toward her with sticks, never hands. Every crop failure, every sickness, every misfortune, it was laid at her feet like a rotting offering. And the cruelest truth? She had believed them. She had believed the sky darkened when she cried. She had believed no one loved her because she was born unlovable. Loneliness wasn't a wound. It was law. Serenai lifted one shaking hand and touched her hair. Her fingers trembled as they found the streak of brilliant white cutting through the midnight dark strands. It hadn't been there before. Before she touched him. Before she saved him. Now it blazed like a scar. A warning. A price. She didn't understand what had happened in that room. She didn't understand the force that had torn through her, the light that had poured from her hands, the way his dying body had drunk from hers like she was a well, and he was drowning. But she understood this. She had given something. And she didn't know if she would ever get it back. Her wrists throbbed beneath the silver chains. Her chest ached with every breath. Her body felt hollowed out, like something vital had been carved away, and she was only now realizing the shape of the absence. She pressed her forehead against her knees and tried not to think about the way his eyes had flown open. Gold. Burning. Alive. Locked on her face. For one impossible moment, someone had seen her. And then they dragged her into the dark. The sound of boots on stone made her lift her head. Slow. Steady. Deliberate. Not the hurried march of guards. Not the shuffle of a servant. This was someone who walked like they owned the ground beneath their feet. Serenai's heart kicked against her ribs. The footsteps grew closer, echoing down the narrow corridor, and she pressed herself harder against the wall, wrists burning, breath shallow. She didn't want to hope. Hope was dangerous. Hope was the cruelest joke the universe had ever played on her. But her body betrayed her, pulse racing, lungs tight, eyes fixed on the darkness beyond the bars. The footsteps stopped. A figure stepped into the dim torchlight. Tall. Broad-shouldered. Moving with the kind of power that didn't need to announce itself. King Valor Draven. Serenai's breath caught. He looked nothing like the dying man she had touched. His skin was no longer ashen. His body no longer trembled. The silver veins that had crawled beneath his flesh like poison were gone, leaving only smooth, unmarked skin. He was whole. He was alive. And he was staring at her. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Serenai couldn't move. Couldn't breathe. Couldn't do anything but stare at the man who should have been dead. His eyes were gold, bright, burning, ancient. The eyes of an alpha. The eyes of a king. But there was something else in them now. Something she didn't recognize. Something that made her chest ache. He moved closer to the bars, and she flinched, the chains rattling softly. He stopped. His jaw tightened. When he spoke, his voice was low, rough, like he hadn't used it in days. "You are not cursed." The words hit her like a physical blow. Serenai stared at him, throat tight, vision blurring. He stepped closer, hands curling around the iron bars, and his gaze never left her face. "You are the reason I am still breathing." She tried to speak. Tried to form words. Tried to tell him he was wrong, that everyone knew what she was, that the elders had named her poison the moment they laid eyes on her. But the sound that came out was broken. A sob. Raw and wrenching and full of 22 years of silence. She broke. Not loudly. Not dramatically. Just broke. Her shoulders shook. Her head dropped. Tears she had spent a lifetime swallowing finally spilled over, hot and relentless, carving paths down her dirt-streaked face. And King Valor Draven, the man who had once silenced battlefields with his name, stood on the other side of the bars and watched her fall apart. He didn't tell her to stop. He didn't walk away. He just stood there, hands gripping the bars, and waited. Hey beautiful souls, before we continue, hit that subscribe button and tell us where you are watching from. The silence between them stretched like a living thing. Serenai couldn't stop shaking. Couldn't stop the tears. Couldn't stop the strange, terrible relief of finally breaking in front of someone who wasn't running away. King Valor didn't move from the bars. His hands stayed wrapped around the iron, knuckles white, as though he was the one caged and not her. His voice came again, softer this time, but no less steady. "I need you to listen to me." She lifted her head slowly, vision blurred, chest heaving. Her wrists burned beneath the silver chains. Her entire body felt like it had been hollowed out and filled with broken glass. But she looked at him. And he looked back. "I know what they did to you," he said. His jaw tightened, a muscle jumping near his temple. "I know they brought you here in chains. I know they whispered witch and curse and poison as they dragged you down these stairs." Serenai flinched at the words. They were too familiar. Too true. "But I also know this." His eyes burned into hers, gold and relentless. "When I was dying, when the silver veins were eating me alive from the inside out, when every healer in 5 territories told me there was no cure, you touched me. And I lived." She shook her head, throat tight, words trapped behind the weight of a lifetime of silence. He stepped closer, until his face was inches from the bars, until she could see the faint shadows under his eyes, the exhaustion he was trying to hide, the raw honesty in his expression. "I have been watching you for longer than you know, Saranai." Her breath stopped. He knew her name. Not the curse they called her. Not the ghost they pretended not to see. Her name. "I have seen you carry water in the cold before dawn while others slept warm in their beds. I have seen you bury the animals no one else would touch. I have seen you scrub floors on your knees until your hands bled, and I have seen the way you make yourself invisible because you believe that is all you deserve." His voice dropped, rough and aching. "I should have stopped it. I should have seen what they were doing to you and torn it down with my own hands. But I was ruling a pack on the edge of war. I was fighting enemies at every border. I was—" He stopped, closed his eyes, exhaled slowly. "I was a coward." The word hung in the air between them, raw and unvarnished. Saranai stared at him, heart pounding, unable to process what she was hearing. A king, calling himself a coward. For her. "I am not here to ask for your forgiveness," Valor continued, opening his eyes again. "I am here to tell you that you are leaving this cell. Now. And no one will ever chain you again." She wanted to believe him. Gods, she wanted to believe him so badly it felt like her ribs were cracking open. But belief was a luxury she had never been able to afford. "They fear me," she whispered, voice broken and small. "They have always feared me. And now they saw what I can do. They will never let me walk free." Something dark and dangerous flickered across Valor's face. "Then they will learn to fear me more." He reached into his belt and pulled out a key iron, simple, worn smooth by use. The cell door groaned as he unlocked it, the sound echoing through the stone corridor like a death knell. Saranai pressed herself harder against the wall, chains rattling, heart hammering. He stepped inside. The space between them vanished. She could feel the heat radiating from his body, the raw power that hummed beneath his skin, the scent of cedar and smoke, and something wild that made her wolf stir restlessly inside her chest. She hadn't felt her wolf in years. But now it rose, curious and cautious, reaching toward the alpha standing before her. Valor knelt slowly, bringing himself down to her level, and reached for the silver chains around her wrists. "This will hurt," he said quietly. "But only for a moment." She nodded, throat too tight to speak. He touched the chains, and she hissed as fresh pain lanced through her wrists. But his hands were steady, careful, and within seconds the silver cuffs fell away with a soft clatter. Her skin was blistered and raw, angry red marks circling both wrists. Valor stared at them, jaw clenched, something fierce and furious blazing in his eyes. "I will find out who put these on you," he said softly. "And they will answer for it." Saranai pulled her hands back instinctively, cradling her wrists against her chest. She didn't know what to do with his anger. Didn't know what to do with his care. No one had ever cared before. He rose slowly, extending one hand toward her. "Can you stand?" She looked at his hand. Broad palm. Calloused fingers. Steady and sure. She had spent her entire life being told not to touch. Not to reach. Not to hope. But something in his eyes made her want to try. Slowly, trembling, she placed her hand in his. His fingers closed around hers, warm, solid, real. And he pulled her to her feet. Her legs nearly buckled. Her body screamed in protest. But his other hand came up to steady her, gripping her elbow, holding her upright. "I have you," he said quietly. "I have you." And for the first time in her life, Saranai believed someone might actually mean it. Valor led her through the underground corridors with one hand still steadying her arm, his body angled protectively between her and the shadows. Saranai moved like a ghost beside him, feet barely making sound on the cold stone, mind spinning too fast to catch hold of any single thought. This was real. He was real. She was walking free. The torches along the walls flickered as they passed, casting long shadows that danced like living things. The air smelled like damp earth and old iron, and somewhere far above them, the citadel still celebrated. She wondered if they knew their king had walked into the dungeons alone. She wondered if they cared. "Where are we going?" Her voice came out hoarse, unfamiliar, like she had forgotten how to use it. "Somewhere safe," Valor replied. He didn't look at her, but his grip on her arm remained steady. "Somewhere they cannot reach you. Somewhere safe." The words felt foreign. Impossible. Serenai had never had somewhere safe. Her earliest memory was not of warmth or love or a mother's voice. It was of cold. Stone. The distant howl of wolves that were not her family. The elders had taken her in because law demanded it. Because a child found at the border could not simply be left to die. But they had never let her forget that she was other. Wrong. Cursed. She remembered being 5 winters old, reaching for another child's hand during a festival, and watching the girl's mother yank her away with a look of pure horror. She remembered being 7, trying to help carry water from the well, and having the bucket ripped from her hands before she could contaminate it. She remembered being 12, standing in the rain outside the pack hall while everyone else gathered inside for the harvest moon celebration, because her presence would bring bad luck. And she remembered being 16, when the crops failed for the 3rd year in a row, and the elders called a council to decide whether she should be exiled. They had voted to let her stay. Not out of mercy. Out of fear that sending her away would only spread the curse further. So she stayed. And she learned to make herself smaller. Quieter. Less. She learned to swallow every word before it could become a plea. She learned that loneliness was not a wound you healed from. It was a scar you carried until you forgot what your skin looked like without it. But there was one thing she had never told anyone. One truth she had buried so deep inside herself that even she sometimes forgot it was there. The night she turned 18, something had woken inside her. A heat. A pressure. A power that coiled beneath her ribs like a sleeping serpent. She had been alone in her shed, shivering in the dark when it happened. Her hands had begun to glow. Soft at first. Then brighter. A silver-white light that poured from her palms like water, illuminating the cramped space, making the shadows flee. She had stared at her hands in terror, trying to will the light away, trying to bury it back down where it belonged. And eventually, it had obeyed. The glow had faded. The power had retreated. But it had never fully left. She felt it sometimes, late at night, stirring restlessly beneath her skin. A living thing. A force that wanted out. She had spent 4 years learning to keep it caged. Until tonight. Until a dying king's chest beneath her palm and a healer's stumble and fate's cruel, perfect timing. The power had ripped free. And now everyone knew. "They will come for me," Serenai said quietly. "The council. The elders. They will demand answers." "Let them," Valor replied, voice hard as iron. "They will get nothing from me but silence." She glanced at him, taking in the sharp line of his jaw, the tension in his shoulders, the way he moved through the dark like he owned it. King Valor Draven. The strongest alpha in 5 territories. A warrior forged in blood and victory. And he was protecting her. It didn't make sense. None of this made sense. Why? The question slipped out before she could stop it. "Why are you doing this?" He stopped walking, turned to face her fully. In the flickering torchlight, his eyes were molten gold. "Because when I was drowning in silver poison, when my body was betraying me and my mind was fracturing, I felt you." His voice was low, intense, every word deliberate. "I felt your fear, your pain, your certainty that you were not worth saving. And I felt you give me your life anyway." Her breath hitched. "You did not hesitate," he continued. "You did not ask for payment or gratitude or mercy. You just gave. And I will spend the rest of my life making sure no one ever makes you feel worthless again." Serenai's eyes burned with fresh tears. She wanted to tell him he was wrong. That she was not brave. That she had not chosen to save him, her power had simply taken over. But the words wouldn't come. Because maybe, just maybe, he saw something in her that she had never been able to see in herself. They emerged from the underground passages into a part of the citadel Serenai had never seen. A hidden corridor. Stone walls carved with symbols she didn't recognize. The air here felt different, older, heavier, thick with something that made her skin prickle. Valor led her to a small door at the end of the hall, pushed it open, and gestured for her to enter. She stepped inside and stopped breathing. It was a shrine. Ancient. Sacred. Untouched by time. The circular room was carved entirely from black stone, smooth and cold beneath her bare feet. In the center stood an altar, and above it, painted across the domed ceiling in faded silver and gold, was a mural. A wolf. Massive and luminous. Its fur was white as moonlight, its eyes twin stars. And in its chest, where a heart should be, burned a silver flame. Serenai stumbled backward, hand flying to her mouth. Valor caught her gently. Easy. You are safe here. What is this place? She whispered. The shrine of the First Mother, he replied quietly. It has been sealed for over 200 years. Only the reigning Alpha has the key. She tore her gaze from the ceiling to look at him. Why did you bring me here? His expression was unreadable. Because I needed to know if the stories were true. What stories? He gestured to the mural above them. The prophecy of the Lumina. The words settled into her chest like a stone dropped into still water. Lumina. Long ago, Valor began, voice taking on the cadence of a storyteller. Before the packs fractured and the territories divided, there was one wolf who could heal the dying and raise the fallen. She carried the light of the First Mother in her veins. They called her the Lumina, the light bearer. Serenai shook her head. That is just a myth. Is it? He moved closer to the altar, running his fingers along the carved stone. The prophecy says that when the world falls into darkness, when poison spreads and kings fall, the Lumina will return. Marked by silver. Born under a blood moon. Rejected by her people until the moment she is needed most. Her heart slammed against her ribs. Blood moon. Silver mark. Rejected. No. No, it couldn't be. I am not, her voice broke. I am just a cursed Omega. I am nothing. Valor turned to face her fully, and his eyes were blazing. You saved my life with a single touch. You pulled death out of my veins and replaced it with light. Your hair turned white from the power you gave. He stepped closer, closing the distance between them. Tell me that is nothing. She couldn't. Because it wasn't nothing. It was everything. And that terrified her more than any chain ever could. Look. Valor pointed to a section of the altar she hadn't noticed before. Carved into the stone were words. Ancient script. Faded, but still legible. She moved closer, pulse racing, and read them aloud. She will bear the mark of sacrifice. She will walk among the broken. She will be feared before she is loved. And when the silver veins consume the strongest, she will choose, give her light, or let the world fall dark. The room spun. Serenai pressed a hand to her chest, feeling her heart thunder beneath her palm. This cannot be real, she whispered. I am not, I cannot be. You already are, Valor said softly. She looked up at him, vision blurring, and saw something in his face that made her chest ache. Belief. He believed in her. Even when she couldn't believe in herself. What if I cannot do it? Her voice was small, broken. What if I am not strong enough? He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and when she didn't, he cupped her face gently in his hands. His palms were warm against her tear-streaked cheeks. His touch impossibly steady. Then I will be strong for both of us, he said. Until you remember how to be strong for yourself. And in that moment, standing in an ancient shrine beneath the painted gaze of the First Mother, Serenai felt something crack open inside her chest. Not breaking. Awakening. They stayed in the shrine until dawn broke, pale light filtering through cracks in the ancient stone. Serenai sat on the floor near the altar, knees drawn to her chest, staring at the mural above. The white wolf. The silver flame. The prophecy that claimed she was something more than the curse the world had named her. She wanted to believe it. But belief required trust, and trust had been beaten out of her long ago. Valor stood near the door, silent and watchful, giving her space to breathe, to think, to exist without expectation. It was the kindest thing anyone had ever done for her. But the peace shattered when footsteps thundered down the corridor outside. Valor's head snapped up, body tensing, eyes flashing gold. The door burst open. 3 figures stormed in, council members, their faces twisted with fury and fear. At the front was Elder Thorn, a man whose disapproval had followed Serenai since childhood, his gray beard trembling with rage. "Your Majesty," he snarled, barely containing his anger. "What is the meaning of this?" Valor stepped between Serenai and the intruders, his presence a wall of controlled power. "You will address me with respect, Elder, or you will leave." Thorn's lip curled. "Respect? You bring that creature into the sacred shrine? You free her after what she did?" "What she did," Valor said, voice deadly calm, "was save my life." "She cursed you," another council member spat. "A woman named Maris, her face pale and pinched. She has been poison in this pack for 22 years, and now she has revealed her true nature. She must be dealt with." Serenai pressed herself harder against the altar, heart hammering, the old familiar terror rising in her throat. They were going to take her. Chain her again. Or worse. Dealt with. Valor's voice dropped to a growl that made the air vibrate. "Choose your next words very carefully, Maris." But Elder Thorn stepped forward, emboldened by righteousness and decades of unchallenged authority. "The girl is dangerous. She wields power we do not understand. Power that could destroy us all." He pointed a gnarled finger at Serenai. The blood moon marked her. The stillness claimed her. "She is everything the old warnings spoke of." "The old warnings," Valor said slowly, "spoke of a savior, not a threat." "Savior?" Thorn laughed, bitter and sharp. "She is an abomination. And you are blinded by gratitude and whatever spell she has cast over you." The accusation hung in the air like smoke. Valor's jaw clenched. His hands curled into fists. For a moment, Serenai thought he might strike the elder down where he stood. But then Maris spoke again, voice dripping with false concern. "Your Majesty, we only wish to protect the pack. Surely you can see the danger. What if her power turns against us? What if the next time she touches someone, she does not heal, but kills?" The words hit Serenai like a blade, because she had thought the same thing. What if they were right? What if the light inside her was not salvation but destruction waiting to be unleashed? She looked at Valor, expecting to see doubt finally creeping into his eyes. But he never looked away from the council. "You have 2 choices," he said, voice cold as winter stone. "You will accept that Serenai is under my protection, and you will treat her with the dignity you have denied her for her entire life. Or you will leave this citadel and never return." Silence crashed down. Elder Thorn's face turned purple with fury. "You would exile your own council? For her?" Without hesitation. The words were simple. Final. Absolute. Thorn turned his glare on Serenai, and the hatred in his eyes was a living thing. "This is not over, girl. You may have deceived the king, but the pack knows what you are. And when your curse finally shows its teeth, we will be ready." He turned and stormed from the shrine, the other council members trailing behind him, their whispers echoing down the corridor like hissing serpents. When the door slammed shut, the silence felt heavier than before. Valor stood still, shoulders rigid, breathing carefully controlled. Serenai rose on shaking legs. "You should not have done that." He turned to her, and the raw emotion in his eyes stole her breath. "They have spent your entire life making you believe you are less than nothing. I will not stand by and let them continue. But the council can be replaced. The pack will learn." Valor. His name felt strange on her tongue. Intimate. Forbidden. "You are a king. You cannot choose me over your people." He crossed the space between them in 3 strides, and suddenly he was right there, close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from his body, close enough to see the gold flecks in his eyes. "You are my people," he said fiercely. "You bled for me. You gave your light to pull me back from death. And I will burn this entire citadel to the ground before I let them hurt you again." Her chest ached. Her eyes burned. "They will not stop," she whispered. "They will find a way to destroy me. They always do." Something dark and dangerous flickered across his face. "Then I will teach them what it means to come for what is mine." The words wrapped around her like a vow. But even as warmth bloomed in her chest, even as hope tried to take root, a cold truth whispered in the back of her mind. The world had been against her for 22 years. One Alpha King could not change that. Not even one who looked at her like she was worth saving. Night fell over the citadel like a heavy cloak. Valor brought Serenai to a small chamber high in the northern tower, far from the council halls, far from the whispers, far from the eyes that had watched her with suspicion her entire life. The room was simple but warm. A bed with soft furs. A fireplace crackling with fresh flames. A window that overlooked the forest stretching endlessly into darkness. Serenai stood in the center of the room, arms wrapped around herself, still unable to believe this was real. A bed. Warmth. Safety. Things she had never been allowed to want. "You should eat," Valor said quietly from the doorway. She turned to find him holding a tray bread, cheese, dried meat, a cup of water. Simple food, but more than she usually saw in a week. He set it on the small table near the fire, then stepped back, giving her space. Always giving her space. Always letting her choose. "I am not hungry," she lied. His mouth curved slightly. Not quite a smile, but close. "You have not eaten since yesterday. Your body needs strength." "My body," she said softly, "has survived on far less." The almost smile faded. His eyes darkened with something that looked like guilt. He moved to the window, staring out at the forest, hands clasped behind his back. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then, quietly, "I was 7 when I first killed someone." Serenai's breath caught. "A rival pack attacked during the winter. They wanted our stores. Our territory. They did not care that children slept in the beds they burned." His voice was distant, haunted. "My father put a blade in my hand and told me to fight or die. So I fought." She took a step closer, drawn by the rawness in his voice. "I have spent my entire life fighting," Valor continued. "Fighting to survive. Fighting to lead. Fighting to prove I was strong enough to carry the weight of a crown I never asked for." He turned to face her, and the vulnerability in his eyes was staggering. "But when the silver veins began to spread, when I felt my body betraying me from the inside, I realized something." "What?" The word barely made it past her lips. "Strength means nothing if you die alone." The confession hung between them like a sacred thing. Serenai moved closer to the fire, needing the warmth, needing something to anchor her. "I have always been alone," she said quietly. "I do not know how to be anything else." "Neither do I." He crossed to the fireplace, lowering himself to sit on the stone hearth. "But perhaps we could learn together." She looked at him, really looked at him. Not the king. Not the alpha. Just the man who had walked into the darkness to find her. The man who had chosen her when the world told him not to. Slowly, carefully, she sat beside him. Not touching, but close enough to feel the warmth of his presence. For a long time, neither of them spoke. They just sat, watching the flames dance, listening to the fire crackle and pop. It was the most peaceful silence Serenai had ever known. "Tell me something true," Valor said eventually. His voice was soft, almost hesitant. "Something you have never told anyone." She hesitated. Walls that had taken a lifetime to build did not crumble in a single night. But something about him made her want to try. "I used to imagine," she began slowly, "that my real family would come for me. That someone, somewhere, was looking for me. That I was not truly alone." She swallowed hard. "I stopped imagining that when I was 10. Valor's hands tightened in his lap. "What happened when you were 10? The elders told me the truth. That I was found wrapped in blood-stained cloth. That whoever left me there did so on purpose. That no one was coming. Her voice cracked. That I was never meant to be kept. He turned to her, and the pain in his eyes mirrored her own. You were meant to survive, he said fiercely. You were meant to endure. You were meant to be here, in this moment, exactly as you are. Tears burned her eyes. How can you be so certain? Because if you were not, his voice broke. Started again. If you were not, I would be dead. And I would have died never knowing what it felt like to be seen by someone who asks for nothing in return. Her breath hitched. He reached out slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, and brushed a strand of white-streaked hair from her face. His touch was gentle, reverent, like she was something precious. I see you, Serenai, he whispered. All of you. The girl who scrubs floors and buries the dead and makes herself invisible because she thinks that is all she deserves. The woman who carries light in her veins and does not yet know her own power. The soul who gave everything to save a stranger. A tear slipped down her cheek. I see you, he said again. And I am not afraid. She leaned into his touch, just slightly, just enough to feel the warmth of his palm against her skin. For the first time in her life, she let herself be seen. And she did not disappear. 3 days passed in the tower like a dream. Serenai slept in a real bed, ate real food, walked through corridors without being spat at or shoved aside. Valor stayed close, never intrusive but always present, teaching her to read the old texts in the shrine, showing her the maps of territories she had never been allowed to see, talking to her like she was someone worth listening to. And slowly, impossibly, something warm and fragile began to bloom in her chest. Hope. But hope, she was learning, could be the most dangerous thing of all. On the 4th morning, a messenger arrived. A young wolf, breathless and pale, bowing low before the king. Your Majesty, the council has called an emergency gathering. They request your presence immediately. Valor's jaw tightened. Tell them I will come when I am ready. They said. The messenger swallowed hard. They said it concerns the girl. Serenai's stomach dropped. Valor's eyes flashed gold. What about her? They have evidence, Your Majesty. Evidence of her true nature. They demand she be brought before the pack. The air in the room turned cold. Valor rose slowly, power radiating from him like heat from a forge. I will handle this, he said to Serenai, voice tight. Stay here. Do not leave this room. But fear was already clawing up her throat. Valor, I will not let them touch you. He cupped her face gently, urgently. Do you trust me? She wanted to say yes. She wanted to believe him. But trust was not built in 3 days. Still, she nodded. He pressed a kiss to her forehead, brief, achingly tender, and then he was gone. Serenai stood alone in the tower room, heart hammering, and tried not to let panic consume her. An hour passed. Then 2. The silence was unbearable. Finally, unable to stand it any longer, she slipped from the room and made her way through the citadel corridors toward the great hall. She could hear them before she saw them. Voices. Angry. Shouting. She pressed herself against the wall outside the hall entrance and listened. Proof that she is exactly what we feared. Elder Thorn's voice boomed. The old woman from the border village came forward. She remembers the night the child was found. Serenai's blood turned to ice. She says the girl was not abandoned, Thorn continued. She was cast out. Exiled by her own blood for bringing death wherever she walked. 3 children died in her birth village. Stillborn. Cursed. The families blamed the newborn and demanded she be removed. Murmurs rippled through the gathered wolves. That is a lie, Valor's voice cut through the noise, hard and commanding. You have no proof. We have a witness. You have an old woman's memory twisted by decades of superstition. Then explain this. Maris stepped forward, holding something in her hands. A bundle of cloth. Torn. Stained deep crimson. The cloth Serenai had been wrapped in as a baby. We had it examined by the healers, Maris said, voice ringing with triumph. The blood on this cloth is not human. It is wolf. And it carries the scent of death magic. The hall erupted. Shouts. Accusations. Fear spreading like wildfire. Serenai's legs nearly gave out. Death magic. The words echoed in her skull, drowning out everything else. Enough. Valor's roar silenced the room. I will not stand here and listen to baseless accusations against someone who has done nothing but survive. She is a threat. Thorn shouted back. And you are blinded by whatever hold she has over you. The only threat here, Valor snarled, is your fear. Then prove us wrong. Maris stepped forward, eyes gleaming with cold calculation. Let her be tested. Let the Moon Priestess examine her. If she is truly innocent, the ritual will show it. Serenai's heart stopped. The Moon Ritual. She had heard of it in whispers. A sacred test that forced a wolf to reveal their true nature. Their deepest self. Their hidden sins. If she was truly cursed, the ritual would expose her. And the pack would have every right to destroy her. No. Valor's voice was flat. Final. I will not subject her to your twisted judgment. Then you leave us no choice. Thorn's voice was cold. The council votes to remove her from the pack. Immediately. By force if necessary. The room fell silent. Valor stood at the center of the hall, body rigid, eyes blazing with barely contained fury. And for the first time since Serenai had met him, she saw him hesitate. Because he was not just an alpha. He was a king. And kings had to choose between what they wanted and what their people demanded. Serenai could not watch him make that choice. Could not watch him sacrifice everything for someone the world insisted was not worth saving. So she stepped into the hall. Every head turned. Every eye locked on her. And the hatred in those gazes was a physical weight. I will take the test, she said, voice shaking but clear. I will submit to the Moon Ritual. Serenai, no, Valor started toward her. But she held up a hand, stopping him. If I am truly what they say I am, she continued, meeting Thorn's gaze, then they deserve to know. And if I am not, her voice cracked, then perhaps it is time the truth was finally seen. Elder Thorn smiled. It was the smile of a man who had already won. So be it, he said. The ritual will take place at moonrise. And may the First Mother have mercy on your cursed soul. Moonrise came too quickly. They led Serenai to the ritual grounds, a circular clearing deep in the forest where ancient stones stood like silent witnesses. The pack gathered in a wide ring around the perimeter, their faces painted in shadows and firelight, their eyes hungry for judgment. Serenai walked barefoot across the cold earth, dressed in a simple white shift the priestess had given her. Her hair hung loose down her back, the white streak blazing like a brand against the dark. She could feel their stares, their fear, their certainty that she would be exposed for the monster they believed her to be. Valor stood at the edge of the circle, body rigid, jaw clenched so tight she thought his teeth might crack. He had tried to stop this, had argued and threatened and commanded. But the council had invoked ancient law, and even a king could not overturn the will of the moon. The priestess emerged from the trees, an old woman wrapped in silver robes, her eyes milky white with age and vision. She moved slowly, reverently, carrying a bowl of liquid that shimmered in the moonlight. Serenai of no bloodline, the priestess intoned, voice echoing across the clearing. You stand accused of carrying death in your veins, of bearing a curse that threatens all who walk in your shadow. The Moon Mother will see your truth. She will judge your soul. And her judgment is final. Serenai's heart hammered against her ribs. She stepped forward into the center of the circle, where a shallow pool of water reflected the full moon above. The priestess approached, dipped her gnarled fingers into the bowl, and traced a symbol across Serenai's forehead. The liquid burned like ice. Kneel, the priestess commanded. Serenai knelt at the edge of the pool, her reflection staring back at her, pale, terrified, marked. The priestess began to chant. Old words. Sacred words. Words that pulled at something deep inside Serenai's chest. The forest around them fell silent. Even the wind stopped breathing. And then the pain began. It started in her core, a twisting, wrenching agony that tore through her like claws. She gasped, doubling over, hands slamming into the water. The pool began to glow. Silver light poured from beneath the surface, spreading outward in ripples that illuminated the entire clearing. The gathered wolves stepped back, murmuring, fear dancing across their faces. Serenai tried to pull her hands from the water, but they were locked in place. The light grew brighter, hotter, burning up through her arms into her chest. And then she saw them. Visions. Flashing before her eyes like shattered glass. A village burning. Children screaming. A woman with dark hair and desperate eyes wrapping a newborn in crimson cloth, tears streaming down her face. I am sorry, the woman whispered. I am so sorry. But they will kill you if you stay. They will kill us both. The vision shifted. A man with silver eyes standing over 3 small graves, rage twisting his features. The girl brings death. She must be removed. Cast out. Forgotten. Another shift. The same woman running through the forest, clutching the bundled infant, sobs racking her body. She reaches the border of Wolf's Reach and lays the child beneath a waning blood moon. May you find mercy where I could not give it, she whispers. May you survive what I could not protect you from. She presses a kiss to the baby's forehead. And then she runs, leaving her daughter to the wolves. The vision shattered. Serenai gasped, yanking her hands from the water, her entire body shaking. The clearing was silent. Every eye was locked on her. But it was not judgment she saw in their faces now. It was shock. Because where the pool of water had been, there now stood a pillar of silver flame, beautiful and terrible and utterly impossible. And at its center, rising slowly to her feet, was Serenai. Her hair had turned completely white, cascading down her back like moonlight itself. Her eyes blazed with luminous power. And from her hands poured ribbons of light that danced and coiled like living things. The priestess fell to her knees. The lumina, she breathed. The prophecy is true. Elder Thorn stumbled backward, face pale as death. This cannot. But his words died as Serenai turned her gaze on him. She did not speak. She did not need to. The power radiating from her said everything. And then the forest exploded into chaos. Dark shapes burst from the trees, wolves, but wrong, twisted, their eyes glowing red with corruption. They moved with unnatural speed, foam dripping from their jaws, shadows clinging to their fur like living smoke. The pack scattered, screaming, as the creatures descended. Serenai's breath caught. This was no accident. Someone had sent them. Someone wanted her dead. Or wanted to prove she was dangerous. One of the corrupted wolves lunged straight for a group of children huddled near the stones. And Serenai moved. She did not think. Did not hesitate. She simply acted. Her hand shot forward, and silver light exploded from her palm, slamming into the creature mid-leap. It screamed, an inhuman sound, and disintegrated into ash. Another wolf charged from the left. Serenai spun, light blazing from both hands now, and the creature met the same fate. More came. And she burned them all. The clearing became a storm of silver fire and shadow, the corrupted beasts falling one by one beneath her relentless fury. The pack watched in stunned silence as the cursed Omega they had feared their entire lives stood between them and annihilation. Protecting them. Saving them. Proving every single one of them wrong. When the last creature fell, Serenai stood in the center of the clearing, chest heaving, hands still glowing with power. The silver flames around her flickered and faded. Her legs trembled. And then she collapsed. Valor was there before she hit the ground, catching her, cradling her against his chest. I have you, he whispered fiercely. I have you. She looked up at him, vision blurring, and managed a weak smile. I am not cursed, she breathed. His eyes burned with something fierce and proud and utterly devoted. "No," he said. "You are not." And as the pack slowly gathered around them, no longer with hatred, but with awe, Saranai finally understood. She had never been the curse. She had always been the cure. The days that followed the ritual blurred together like watercolors in rain. Saranai woke in the tower room, body aching, power still humming beneath her skin like a second heartbeat. Valor stayed with her, refusing to leave even when the council demanded his presence, his hand wrapped around hers like an anchor. The pack had changed. Where once they spat at her shadow, they now bowed their heads when she passed. Where once they whispered curse, they now whispered Lumina. Where once they feared her, they now came to her, begging for healing, for hope, for salvation. And each time she gave it, she felt something inside her dim. The white in her hair spread further. Her body grew weaker. Her light flickered like a candle burning too fast. She was saving them. And it was killing her. Valor saw it. She knew he saw it. But he said nothing, only held her tighter when she collapsed after each healing, only whispered fierce promises against her hair when she trembled in his arms. "You do not have to save everyone," he told her one night as they sat by the fire. "Yes," she said softly. "I do." Because for the first time in her life, she mattered. For the first time, she was seen. And she would give every last drop of light inside her to keep that feeling alive. Even if it meant there would be nothing left of her when the giving was done. But there were others who did not see salvation when they looked at her. They saw power. And power, in the wrong hands, was a weapon. Elder Thorn had gone silent since the ritual. Too silent. His eyes tracked her movements with cold calculation, and Saranai knew, she knew, that he was not finished. He would find a way to use her. Or destroy her. The choice was his. And then the sickness came. It started in the southern villages, a plague unlike anything the healers had seen. Black veins spreading beneath the skin. Fever that burned hot enough to cook a body from the inside. Death within 3 days. They brought the sick to her. Dozens of them. Saranai healed them all. One by one, she laid her hands on burning skin and pulled the darkness out, dragging it into herself, letting her light chase away the poison. And one by one, she felt herself breaking. By the time the last patient was healed, Saranai could barely stand. Her hair was snow white from root to tip. Her hands shook. Her vision blurred at the edges. Valor carried her back to the tower, and when he laid her on the bed, she saw fear in his eyes. Real fear. "You are giving too much," he said, voice rough. "You have to stop." "I cannot." Her voice was barely a whisper. "They need me. I need you." His hands cupped her face, desperate. "I need you to stay. Do you hear me? I need you to stay." Tears slipped down her cheeks. "I do not know if I can." His forehead pressed against hers, and she felt his breath shudder. "Then I will find a way to bring you back. I will tear apart the heavens if I have to. I will beg the Moon Mother herself. But I will not lose you." She wanted to believe him. But the truth was settling into her bones like winter frost. She was not meant to stay. She was meant to burn bright and beautiful and brief. She was meant to give everything. And when she was gone, the world would finally remember that the cursed girl they had thrown away was the only thing that ever stood between them and the dark. The question was not whether she would sacrifice herself. The question was whether they would deserve it. So tell me, would you have chosen her side? Would you have seen the light before it was almost too late? Would you have loved the girl everyone else feared, or would you have been just another voice in the crowd calling her cursed? Saranai's story does not end here. It is only beginning. And what happens next will shatter you in all the ways that matter. Because love in a broken world is never simple. Redemption in a cruel world is never free. And sometimes the girl who saves everyone cannot save herself. If this story has lit something inside you, if Saranai's pain and power and impossible courage have carved a space in your chest, then do not let it end here. Subscribe to Cindy's Wolfheart Stories. Because here, we tell tales that burn. We tell stories of girls who were thrown away and came back blazing. We tell stories of love that defies kingdoms and curses and fate itself. We tell stories that remind you what it feels like to believe in something worth fighting for. Serenai's journey is far from over. And if you want to know whether she survives, whether love is enough, whether the cursed Omega becomes the queen she was always meant to be,